Hello, and welcome to our weekly LinkedIn Live leadership series, Voices of Leadership. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kathy Eastwood, your host and the founder and CEO of E=Y. Each week, we explore the fascinating world of leadership, featuring voices from various generations, industries, and backgrounds. A team's job is to deliver results. It's the role of the leader to help empower, inspire, and enable the people in the team to deliver those results. And there's a repeatable formula to drive that success, the E3 leadership code: express plus engage plus execute, powered by emotional qualities. However, each leader's approach to applying that code is unique because there's no one way to lead and show up. And that's why we love really showcasing different leaders every week so you can hear how people choose to show up. So please let us know where you're calling from. Use the chat. Share your LinkedIn. This is an opportunity for you to network as well with other folks. And then ask questions, because we have a really special guest today that I'm extremely excited about. And I know he's excited to answer lots of your questions as well. So let's dig in. When I think about what it really takes to move big strategy into real results, one role comes to mind, and it's the Chief of Staff. And it's such a unique position, and probably because I've been a Chief of Staff and I love the role. But it's a role where you don't have to have direct authority, but yet you're influencing, you're aligning, and you're making sure things actually get done. It is one of the hardest leadership roles, in my opinion, but one of the most important. And that's why I'm so excited to have Phil Burns with us today. Phil is the founder and executive director of the Chief of Staff Roundtable, a community that is equipping chiefs of staff all over the world to succeed in this work. So, when I think about this, it's the powerful partnerships. And then Phil and I were talking before we got on today. So Phil, I'm really excited to have you here. But we have the unique advantage of not just being chiefs of staff, but now being founders and leaders of our own companies. So I have not even done an ounce of real introduction, Phil, of what you have done, what you've achieved. So why don't you share with our audience about yourself, how you got into the Chief of Staff role, and then how you got started with the roundtable?
I'd love to, Kathy. Thanks so much for having me. It's Listen, it's an amazing world, incredible world we live in today, especially for leaders, right? They're having to navigate challenges that they've never had to navigate before, and it's a lot of pressure to handle on their own. And for me, when I think about the work that I've been involved in most of my career, I've always been to the right or to the left of the primary leader of whatever organization or I've been a part of. And so I've always had this imagination for great leadership, but for most of my career, have always been in the seat next to the primary leader, helping them realize their vision in in a variety of different roles. And so, in a lot of ways, I've been in the headspace of a chief of staff for most of my career, but didn't formally become a chief of staff in title and in real scope until about 7 years ago. I was a new chief of staff at a small graduate school here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's actually where I met my wife when she was in graduate school while I was the chief of staff there, and I was really excited about the role. And I was really excited. It felt like very much like a climax and a pinnacle kind of my career story up until that point. And so obviously very excited about becoming a chief of staff, but what I wasn't ready for was the perpetual face plant and free fall that I would soon experience once I became a chief of staff. And much of that experience has to do with, at the time and even today, largely speaking, the chief of staff role is very new, and it's finding its legs kind of outside of its traditional context, which is the government and the military. And so for my first chief of staff role, I was the first chief of staff to a leader who never had a chief of staff before, to an organization that had never had a chief of staff before. And so, as I tell folks, the learning curve was straight up on all sides. And it took me a year. Folks that are in these roles, we tend to operate as islands. We think that we can just figure it out on our own. And in a lot of ways, that is our mandate to figure it out, because we don't often have a team. And so, but what I realized a year in was that I wasn't going to be as successful as I wanted to be in this role unless I had peers around me powering my success. Peers that have done this work before, that share the same imagination that I did for the role that I had, the impact that I wanted to have on my organization. And at the time, none of those spaces, nothing had really existed in what I was looking for. And so I remember having this quiet desperation of like, dadgummit, I know I want to be successful, but I don't know how to get there. I'm going to start talking and phone call, cold DMing folks that are in these roles to see how did they find their path to success. And so I started doing that on LinkedIn. I think over a matter of 3 months, I probably sent out 300 cold DMs. And I basically said, hey, Phil Burns here. I just crossed my year mark as a chief of staff, and I wanted to reach out to hear about your experience in the role. Um, would you be open to a 15, 20-minute conversation? And what I was amazed by was how receptive folks were to helping me find my path forward, my path to success in this role, just through a simple outreach on LinkedIn. And so after a number of those conversations, we all realized that like, hey, we're helping each other out, sharing best practices, but like, what would it look like if we had a standing conversation, a space to talk about what success really looks like in our roles and use that collective knowledge to build resources that we can take and use in between these conversations to help us each other be more successful. And so we started roundtables every month, last Friday of the month, same time every month. And I started running these forums as a hobby. And a few years passed by. A lot of folks started just coming to these forums. And you're like, wow, there's something really here. Our community started to really develop and it was really forged from these conversations where we talk about what does success look like in the variety of different issues and challenges that chiefs of staff have to navigate. And so we decided let's make this a real thing because there's real value here in creating a safe space for practitioners to come where their voices can be heard, where everyone has a seat at the table in terms of what the topic we're talking about or the theme we're talking about. And that knowledge is used to actually create real resources that are field tested from real practitioner collective knowledge sharing. So we've now been doing these roundtables for over 6 years now. And we've built a global network of folks that are really serious about this work. And it's all been really timely because the growth of the chief of staff role, I mean, you don't have to be on LinkedIn very long to realize more and more leaders are realizing that they've been missing a critical link in connecting their vision to real results. And the chief of staff role, in my opinion, and at the roundtable, is one of the best roles, one of the best assets leaders can start to utilize to bring their vision to life in ways that doesn't burn them out or their organization in the process and their team in the process. So I love this role. I love the people that are in these roles. They're just exceptional human beings. And they're just the best kept secret to succeeding in organizations. And I am all about creating a platform, a stage to help these folks shine and help them be more successful. And so that's what we're about at the Chief of Staff Roundtable.
I love it. So Phil, for you and I that understand what this role is, have been in the role, right, have been coaching people around it, how would you describe this role to others that haven't, they only know the chief of staff in the government, or, quite honestly, some people unfortunately think it's an EA role,
Mhm.
so what is a true chief of staff and what's the true value that they bring to the executives?
It's a great question, Kathy. And I wouldn't say it's an obvious question. I mean, it is an obvious question, but there's not necessarily an obvious answer, which is part of the work at the roundtable. What we're trying to do is to create more obvious, more clarity, less guesswork in this critical role. Countering this question a lot, I think the best way to answer this question is to actually flip the focus from what does chief of staff do, like what is to more of the focus of the leader. So when you think about a leader, a CEO or a vice president or an executive, it's best to consider what are the challenges that they have to navigate. What are the like concentric layers of influence and power they have to navigate. The way I like to think about it is this: every leader has to master themselves, have to practice self leadership. So that has to do with focus, organization, time management, things like that. That's like the first layer, their own mental well-being. That's the first layer that they have to master if they're going to have um, impact in subsequent layers. And so when I think about what does it mean to support, what roles exist to support a leader, um, to put them at their best, to help power their success. Executive assistants are roles that exist primarily around the orbit of the leader's world, immediate world. Those roles are best at that. And so when I, again, drawing some distinction to get, I'll get to the CF in a minute, but that first layer of a leader's success really has to do with self-leadership, making sure their world is in order, right? And that is a critical, important role. In fact, I would say none of the other layers really matter if a leader can't get their own world in order, right? And so when I think of like executive enablement roles, executive assistants, executive business partners, folks that really are experts at orchestrating a leader's world so that they're ready, they're on message, they're talking to the right people, they're spending their time effectively. Those are the best roles for that. It's not the chief of staff role, though. The next layer out are, if a leader has their world in order, what's the next world that they need to manage? Like, what's that next layer? And that next layer are really the leaders or the team that they have immediately around them. So, and those are key assets when it comes to achieving whatever vision or strategy you have. And so that next layer really has to do with that they have to manage is the work itself, the initiatives, scoping initiatives, resourcing initiatives, tracking initiatives. That's where the skills around program management, project management, cross-functional collaboration, a leader has to do that themselves, or they need to find roles that can help them do that, right? And so if I'm thinking about the office of a leader, having someone to tend to their immediate effectiveness, time, energy, focus, executive assistants are the best at that, right? But that next layer out, when it comes to getting the most out of their team, the most focus, the best collaboration, the best alignment, a lot of leaders might find that strategic project folks or cross-functional leads or strategic program managers are better for that kind of role. Their zone of impact is really making sure the leaders and the work that's happening across functions is the right work is moving forward. And so that's that second layer, and those are leadership executive enablement roles. And that's where the chief of staff role starts to take some shape, because you're actually dealing with two layers in a leader's world to help them be successful. What I would argue is the chief of staff role really finds its real focus, its real unique value proposition at this third layer. So this has to do with the broader organization and really managing the preceding layers around a leader. So this is what I mean by that. So in summary, you have the leader, you have the leaders that they're managing, and then you have the net result of kind of the collective impact that they're managing. Chiefs of staff at their best, so when at their highest level of contribution, are actually creating the ecosystem in which the leader and the leaders around that leader can effectively live within. So they are actually looking across the entire organization, the entire leadership team, and working with the leader to create a world in which all aspects, all levels work together in harmony. And that's a big job. That is well beyond simply tracking projects in Trello or Asana, or making sure your executive has a briefing before their next meeting. The imagination of a chief of staff, the level of perspective and vision they bring to their role at their best, is looking after the entire ecosystem that surrounds the primary leader they're supporting, and making sure that ecosystem is as healthy and vibrant and effective as possible. Practically speaking, what does that look like in practice? a chief of staff, by definition, is a proxy for their leader. And another way of thinking of proxy is a clone. So you are operating as a true chief of staff to the degree that you can fully represent and fully advocate for the leader that you attach to or supporting. That leader can be in two places at once because you're in the other place they can't be, and you can represent their vision and perspective. And then, but you can also reciprocate that level of representation of the broader workforce back to the leader as well. So full representation, a copy, a clone of the leader. That's when you know you're a true chief of staff. It's less tactical project management, executive briefing. It's more cloning the leader that you're supporting. Are you literally 2xing their impact at a minimum? Another way of thinking about it is a chief of staff manages the world in between the leaders who are saying this is where we're going and the individuals that are wondering how in the world will we get there. You are managing that world. That is the world that you're managing. And so that's a lot of different ways to think about the chief of staff role. The best definition is the cloning. If you are cloning your leader, if you are multiplying their impact and effectiveness, that is where you know you're operating more at chief of staff level versus some other executive enablement roles.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, it brings me back. At one point, I was the chief of staff. It was a 3,000 person organization, and it really was, the executive couldn't be everywhere all the time. And, having to manage up and out and down and all around. And it's like, how can you fill in the spots and make sure that you're optimizing their time to make sure that they're driving the business forward?
That's right. That's right. And I think a lot of the confusion that happens with chiefs of staff comes from the proximity of this individual in a role is to a leader, and what other roles might be just as proximate, but are different in scope. We all know that like a chief of staff role is not a COO role. It's not a CMO role. It's not the traditional C-suite CXO roles, even though in my opinion, it's very much, those are peer roles. I believe chiefs of staff at their highest, if they're conceived of and scoped appropriately, are tenured positions on C-suites, but the scope of the role is completely different from some of these other vertical functional roles. And so, but that's what's cool about the role is every leader at every stage of growth or every size or stage of maturity, they need different kinds of support and enablement at different stages, and the role can flex to that. But the fundamental purpose of the role remains the same. It's all about multiplying the leader's impact and effectiveness. And so, which is why I love the role. I love helping leaders be more successful because listen, don't we need a world where we need better leaders today? I mean, I can't think of any corner of society or anywhere around the globe when you think about everything that's happening. It's like, my goodness, we need better leaders. And I actually believe that the leaders of tomorrow are being forged in chief of staff roles right now. Because, and that was what you mentioned a moment ago, Kathy, both of us having been chiefs of staff, now as leaders, we have a very unique perspective that I think chiefs of staff need to learn about, of what it means to be in the seat that you're supporting as a chief of staff. So I'd be curious to know for you, could I ask you this question?
Sure.
When you were a chief of staff and you went on your own, what was the biggest, oh my goodness, I didn't realize this about being the leader versus supporting the leader?
I think it's, it's the decision making, right? And it's this making sure the strategy exists and everyone knows where we're going, why we're going, how we're going there. Because, that's my first E, right? With the E3 leadership code, express where we're going, but that falls on the leader, right? And everyone else then falls into place to help design it and influence it. But at the end of the day, it starts with the leader. And if people don't know where we're going, they can't go execute and help you. And that's some days I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the roadblock. That if I don't have some of those answers, people can't go and be successful. And I
Right.
think that's, the ownership, right? Like everything comes down to, do we have the money? Do we have the revenue? Are the costs in line? Right? It falls to one person.
Yeah. Yeah. When I work with chiefs of staff, for those that haven't had the opportunity to like be in the seat, as the primary leader, the one thing I help them think about is what keeps your leader up at night. Like because as a chief of staff, you get an unfiltered, a much more 2020 picture or vision of what's really on the mind of the leader more than anyone else. And the greatest responsibility, but also on both it can be in a crushing way, is like, what do I do with this information? Like, is my leader just having a bad day or a great day? And so, but how do I know that, like, what do I action based on this information? Or how much do I keep to myself and just have, in my encyclopedia knowledge as I interact with other stakeholders and then can inform those conversations? I think that's the hardest part. Chiefs of staff exist at this nexus point, or the blast zone, or the nerve center of the most important decisions, data points, interactions. And it's, what do you do when you're there, when you're at that nexus point? And how do you make sure your leader and your broader team are better off based on what you do with that opportunity and those actions? So I love this role.
Well, and I think for me, like leadership, we talked about we need to have better leaders in the world, right? Leadership
Mhm.
is so crucial. You and I talk about it a lot. I think the chief of staff role gets to see the importance of it because they are taking on, how does my leader absorb it? How do
Mhm.
their direct reports? How does the rest of the organization? You have to be the best leader, in my opinion, because that is the job, is to make sure that everyone is at their best and helping
Mhm.
them perform at their best. Right.
Mhm.
So knowing what is the end vision, knowing how to engage people at the right time, being able to execute against, the strategy and bring it to fruition, and they're setting the standard, right? Like
Mhm.
of what great looks like. Because most of the time, and I don't know if you agree with this, most of the time the chief of staff doesn't have a large team.
Nope.
They're
Nope.
influencing without having the direct reports.
That's right. Or the I say the title or the gravitas or the authority, based on how your decision, um, philosophy or structure or governance. Like, you are representing a decision, someone who is making the final call. And so, at the same time, though, I think again this goes back to the authority that a chief of staff has, by definition, is more derivative than intrinsic, right? Because you're representing a leader, right? You're cloning that person, you know. At the same time, I think the degree of autonomy that you have in terms of that representation, you actually might have more decision autonomy based on the fidelity of and the maturity of that partnership you have with the leader, right? Because so what I mean by that is if you've developed a relationship with your leader where they trust you to be in a meeting with this set of
Big
stakeholders,
word, trust. Yep.
yeah, big word, trust. Um, if they know that you will represent their voice, then they should delegate the decision to you. That's just the risk. Now, but also it also comes down to, if you're the chief of staff, there's a certain level of comfort, right? That if you're in that meeting on behalf of your leader and a decision needs to be made and you don't feel comfortable making that decision because maybe you want to vet it and get, your leader's go ahead on the options, then you do need to bring that to your leader to have that. But again, your job is to multiply your leader's effectiveness, not bog them down in more decisions that they need to make that they've empowered you to make on their behalf. So it's a delicate balance, but it all comes down to, you need time to do that, to build that relationship, to build that partnership. to understand how your leader thinks. What do they care about? What are their pet peeves? What do they ultimately want, when it comes to the vision? And so that takes time to develop. And we help our members, we help folks in the role get a clear path to that level of partnership and contribution, because it will not happen automatically. It just will not. And so we want to be able to short circuit that, and speed that up, because chiefs of staff, you have a very limited amount of time to deliver the most value possible on your leader's behalf. Most folks that are in these roles 18 months to 3 years max, and then they're off to the next thing. It's not a lot of time to really sink your teeth into a real business challenge on behalf of your leader, to create a really compelling story that you can take into future opportunities, whether that's in your current organization, if you're growing and there are those opportunities, or if it's in another organization. And so at the roundtable, we really believe that you shouldn't have to guess of how to get to that work. We want to help you at each stage identify what your mandate is, so that you can accelerate and propel your career forward, and also the success of your leader that you're supporting.
I love it. And when you think about the role and leadership for chiefs of staff, what do you think is one of the greatest skills a chief of staff can have? If you had to pick one superpower.
Superpower. Distillation. And what I mean by that, yes, distillation. Chiefs of staff, because they exist at this nexus point. You guys have probably seen the graph of, like, there's a circle and then there's 4 points, and it shows the points of communication, and then you introduce more points which represent people. The more complex communication gets. So as a chief of staff, you're in the web. You're the spider on the web of that. And so you exist in a point of the organization where you have more context than anyone else. You really do. You see your leader from a perspective they cannot see. You see all the other leaders from a perspective they cannot see. And so all of the engagements that you're happening, all the information that you're gathering, you have to be able to curate and distill that into actions, like discernible, high fidelity actions that make everyone's lives better in the organization. And so it's distillation, it's curation, but it's also this discernment to know, based on what the information I'm receiving, how does that influence the next 3 actions I could take on behalf of the leader that I'm supporting, as it relates to the vision and strategy that we're trying to implement. And there's a lot of chiefs of staff get stuck in this trap of, like, it's all about doing, action, checkbox. They're so action oriented, which is, you need to be, because the work needs to move forward. But you get in this trap of, you get buried in the minutia, in the weeds, in the circuitry of what's happening in your organization, and you lose perspective of, you lose sight of, like, am I actually working on the stuff that really moves the business forward? I saw a post from Tom Guthrie at Chief of Staff Network just last week, and he talked about how chiefs of staff can get caught in what's called fake work. It's not that it's not work, it's just not the right work you should be working on. You can be buried in cleaning up decks and spreadsheets and lots of stuff that honestly probably doesn't need to happen right now. But because this role exists kind of in this nebulous, ambiguous zone of, it can be really easy to settle for the stuff that's most obvious to do and not operate at that higher level. And so, again, going back to distillation, the ability to take the information you're getting and being able to do the most productive next thing with that information that might not involve you pulling the lever or you doing the thing, but finding the right person to do it. And that's beyond delegation. It's like, it's something else. So you're almost like puppet mastering it, but that puts it too negative. But you are working the board to make sure the right work gets done by the right person with the right information. So it's
Yeah.
the convergence of those areas, I think, is the secret skill that no one can do if they're a fresh MBA. I'll just be honest. Like the chief of staff role at its highest level of impact, you need real reps. Like you need real work experience in the role. And again, it's not to say you can't be a chief of staff if you're fresh out of college, you're fresh, but just know the mandate for this role at its highest level, you probably won't be able to meet it. And that's okay. And I think it's important for leaders to know that, um, to know what this role should really be operating at its highest level of contribution.
Yeah, I love that, Phil, because when I think about it, it is it is the fundamental of leadership at its core, and why I love partnering with you at the round table. But leadership is balance, right? And chief of staff is balance. And you talk about distillation. I love that word, and I definitely want to talk more about that. It is being able to be strategic and tactical, at the same time. It's
Yep.
about being, the masculine energy and the feminine energy at the same time. It's being able to work on something big and something small
Mm-hmm.
all at the same time, and knowing when to bring in the emotions, when to bring in the strategy, when to bring in the execution. And you have to bring all of that together and lead the organization through that. And the chief of staff role is at that neck. I love this nexus, right? Like at the
Yep.
center of that, helping everyone see everything that needs to be considered in that.
Ooh, that's a good point. Seeing everything that needs to be considered. Again, this comes back to that you have more context than anyone else. And because you have more context than anyone else, what do you do with that information? So when you're interacting, so you might be in the nature of conversation you're having with your CEO based on the context you have or your primary leader is going to feel and look different based on the information you've gathered from other parts of the organization with their stakeholders. How do you distill that and adjust that for that audience to make sure they have better, higher fidelity information, better information to make decisions only they can make, right? And then how do you do the same thing? How do you take the information you're gathering from your primary leader and make sure the CMO, the COO, or even a frontline employee has higher fidelity information that can help them do their job better? But it's tailoring that to them that makes sense to to highlight one of our other partners, Gracie, their shared cares. Like the idea of like, do you know what everyone cares about in their organization? Not like what's obvious, but like deep down, like, as a leader, what do they really care for? Um, and being able to weave that through. It's just such a unique job, and it's so hard because there's very little concrete, but it's like it's the most important stuff that dictates success or failure, and often in organizations. And so um, I'm all for it. I see a question here in the comments around when to hire a role like this. So, what is a signal in a business or a company that it needs a chief of staff?
Yeah.
Um, how would you answer that question? I'm curious. How would you answer that? And I'll riff off what you said.
I think it's interesting because I'm going to go back to what you said in the beginning of the different levels,
Mhm.
and I think it is about a progression and where a company gets to needing that focus, right? So yes, you need someone to help your self leadership. I love that. Potentially it starts to come in when you have a bigger
Mhm.
team and you have to be able
Mhm.
to balance all of the
Mhm.
different personalities and the cross functional.
Mhm.
But it really is when I think the strategy has a lot of different elements of complexity that you need to make sure that are being
Mhm.
managed. So I think if it's the very single threaded team and focus, you can probably get away with someone that is able to do program management, project management,
Mhm.
maybe doing some of the self leadership elements.
Mhm.
But I think it comes down to complexity when you have
Mhm.
multiple things that need to be managed simultaneously.
Mhm. I love the theme of complexity, because for many that can mean a lot of different things. So like, and the primary leader knowing themselves. I'll give you a great example. Jess, you're on. You're on right here. Jess is our Chief of Staff and Residence here at the Roundtable. I knew I needed Jess as my Chief of Staff and Residence when working with her as a member, coaching her aspiring Chief of Staff, because I knew at the stage of growth that we were at the Roundtable that my focus could go in 1,000 different directions, that needing someone to pull me back to center as a leader, like some leaders don't struggle with that. Some leaders have a very strong sense of like, you know what, I know what the priority is. I'm going to execute against it. There's a lot of they're internally, they have a very strong internal locus of control. They don't have, their external world doesn't pull them. And in some cases for leaders that are in that position, they may not need a chief of staff yet as they're growing their organization, and they can manage that complexity because they have a very strong sense of what's most important, and they have the right tools, and they're very good at being the leader and making sure folks are aligned. But only the leader knows like the level of complexity and risk that they can manage on their own. And so I would say, depending, there's the needs of chief of staff. There's the personal leader, their personal knowing themselves of the amount of complexity and risk that they can manage on their own that doesn't burn them out. I think that's one layer they need to think about. What do you have a reaction to that?
Yeah, and I do. I think you're 100%. But what I'm also thinking about is sometimes your team is the one that knows you need a chief of staff, right? When your team feels like they can't get enough
That's a good
time,
point.
they don't have the direction.
Right.
They feel like
That's a good point.
and so sometimes the leader doesn't recognize it, and
The leader might not know. Yep. And the team's like, you're way off. You're in your own world. You need some help, buddy, or miss. It's like, oh, okay. Then you need to start thinking about, I need some executive enablement roles and functions. Then do the audit. Is my world in disorder? You need a absolutely killer EA, absolutely killer, and they will tame the chaos and get you on center again. Is my team? Am I having trouble managing my team and keeping projects and initiatives going in the right direction and communication? You need an incredible project program manager that is their mandate. Then thinking, do I really struggle with this complexity of managing myself, managing my team, and then just the broader kind of interdependencies of an organization and how to make a vision real across 10 plus people? You might need a chief of staff because you cannot be in 2 places at once, 3 places at once, 4 places at once. You need to extend your presence. I would say at that point, that's when you probably need one. In title, fully scoped, fully representing you, driving the vision forward in real plans. I think that's the point you need it.
I love those 3 questions you asked, and I think that's really important to help leaders think about it. Right? Do you have your house in order? Are you good with what you need? How's the team? Do they all know what you're working on? Then maybe it's strong project management. And if you need someone that you can help delegate and assist, right, then it's the chief of staff. I think it's a great way to give guidance to folks.
Yeah. And I would say if you're at that point where you're like, I need someone to be I can't be in 2, 3, 4 places at once. I need someone who can fully extend my influence and vision. That sounds great. And you probably, but in practice, that takes so much trust and empowerment and advocacy for that person. I talk with a lot of chiefs of staff who, on paper, like the role looks exactly that, but they get inside of the organization and it's completely different. They're scheduling, they're coordinating. And again, all that work is important and needs to happen, but it's not what they signed up for. And so, for folks that are looking at roles right now, or even be reimagining their role, they might be in a current role, but really discouraged, or you feel like you've hit a ceiling. I guarantee you there could be another horizon for you if you're in a current role to go at that next level, right? To be more of an extension, more of a multiplier for your leader. And at the Roundtable, we help you think about how to have those conversations and how to reimagine your role, so that you are spending your time and focus on the most critical work as an extension of your leader, to drive your career forward, but the business and your leader as well. And then if you're looking for roles, like we help you think about signals to look for if this role's right for you, the questions to ask in the interview process to make sure you are not signing up for something that is disingenuous, not by intention, but just because they don't know any better. And so we help you through all of that. But we're all for it. We're all for that process, though.
Excellent. Well, Phil, you and I could probably talk all day long, and we're already
All
at
day,
40 minutes. So,
all day.
so any advice, last minute advice for leaders out there, for chiefs of staff, one piece of advice you might give around leadership?
Invest in it. What I mean by that is, what is it that it's like laws of physics, like entropy is like the natural like course of things, like disintegration, drift. Like as a chief of staff, you have a front row seat to great leadership and bad leadership. And if you're a leader, if you've been in the seat, maybe not even chief staff role, but just know that the leaders that are yourself and the leaders that are around the table, if you don't invest in lifting everyone and their capabilities, it will not happen on its own. You have to invest in it. It's just table stakes for succeeding in business today. And so I love the work that you're doing at E equals Y, the framework that you've created to help leaders create a whole an environment where healthy leaders are forged across the organization at all levels. I think it's absolutely critical because if every leader isn't thinking about how do I multiply myself, then your organization will die. If you don't have someone in the wings that you're helping develop, you're helping to replace you, right? What are you really doing? And it's like you're just doing it for you. And I don't think anyone wants to lay on their pillow at night and say to themselves, well, it looks like I'm just doing this for me. And so there's just a real opportunity here with the work you're leading at E equals Y, the work we're leading here at the roundtable, to put the right platform below leaders and those that support them to power their success. And especially in this age of AI, where it seems like the sky's the limit in terms of how this technology can help everyone move faster, move forward with greater clarity, greater confidence, and greater impact. I couldn't be more excited about the work that we're both leading to help leaders do more.
I agree. I am so thankful to be partnering with you because, again, in agreement, chief of staff, such a powerful role to help elevate organizations, to bring that leadership up across the board. So I think Melda has put a number of links in to be able to follow the Chief of Staff Roundtable to join in. It's a great community. We join as well as much as we can. And also, if you're looking for any leadership development programs, we have a boot camp kicking off next week, the E3 Leadership Boot Camp, just to get some of those basics and understand the leadership code that help you interact better and help drive change, whether or not you are directly responsible for managing people. So thanks all. Phil, thank you so much for joining. Like I said, we could talk all day, and hopefully we'll have you back again because this is
I love it.
enjoyable. So thanks
Absolutely.
all.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Thanks, Phil. And all that have joined us, thanks so much and have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.